Okay, let's try this again. Welcome to Forking Off, the podcast for people who said no to just following orders, where we explore the very personal decisions behind leaving federal service, whether by choice or by force. Every departure has a story, and we're here to share them.
Hi, and welcome to this episode of Forking Off. I'm Jill Fields.
And I'm Philip Fields.
And today we have with us Nikki Rutman. Hi, Nikki.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Great. Oh, we're so glad to have you. So, Nikki, why don't you go ahead and start us off with your bluff, your bottom line up front?
Sure. Like you said, Nikki Rutman. I have been working in intelligence for well over 20 years now. I started my career in the federal government in the U.S. intelligence community. My first stop was the Defense Intelligence Agency. I then went to work for the FBI, took a liaison role with the Office of the Director of National Intelligence and Mission Management before coming back to the Bureau and landing in the Boston Division, which was my last stop before I transitioned out into the private sector to build an intelligence program.
Fantastic. Nikki, we've talked with a lot of different people about how they ended up in public service. So how did you come to public service?
It was a very windy path, to be honest. I had no idea that I wanted to work in the public sector. I literally was all over the place. I actually have an undergraduate degree in biology, and I thought for sure I was going to be a doctor until at some point in my undergrad career, I realized that I really didn't like the sight of blood. But at that point, I was graduating from college and had already taken the entrance exam to medical school and had this epiphany that, okay, maybe medical school isn't the right choice. So I went on to do scientific research at a local medical school and tried a bunch of other things until I landed on just really being interested in Latin America for no real reason other than I liked languages and I really thought the topic was interesting. So I went back to grad school. I started in a master's in public administration. No, actually, I started in an MBA program with a concentration in Latin American studies, transitioned to a master's in public administration program with a focus on Latin American studies, and then dropped that all together and just got a master's degree in Latin American studies that eventually became, hey, I'm going to stay and do a PhD. And I thought I was going to do it on Brazil. And then 9/11 happened. Right before 9/11, I was interested in political interest groups and how they impact policy in the United States and was focusing in on like the Cuban American diaspora and how they impact US policy. Then 9/11 happened, and that was all. Any forward momentum happening at that time for that diaspora just stopped. As I watched those events unfold, I was like, I need to do something related to this. Like, I need to be involved. And that's really, I guess, where that hidden need to be involved in civil service really came out. Was like, I felt this calling to do it. And much to the chagrin of my faculty at the university I was at in the PhD program I was in, changed my focus and got an internship with the Defense Intelligence Agency. And that pretty much sealed the deal. I had almost finished all of my PhD exams. I walked away from all of that to take a second master's, and the rest really was history. I did do some other internships mixed in there to kind of tease out what kind of public service I liked. I worked for a congressperson on the Hill. I worked for a think tank, and neither of those really like clicked for me until I went to DIA's internship. And I'm like, that's it. This is where I belong. This is the work I need to be doing. And I've been doing it ever since.
Oh, that's so great. I love the stories of how people ended up where they were. So you were at the FBI for a really long time. Tell us a little bit about your FBI time and then about when you left.
Yeah, the majority of my intel community experience was with the Bureau. I started at FBI headquarters, well, actually out at LX1, where all the Counterterrorism Division sat at that time, in like 2005. Yeah, LX1 was way better than headquarters.
Much nicer than the Hoover building.
Liberty Crossing, if anybody wants to find it on Google Maps.
And it is not lost on us that if you do look at it on Google Maps, it's a giant X marks the spot, which we joked about daily when we worked in that building. So I started in the Counterterrorism Division. I was in an analytics section in a very niche. A lot of my DIA friends joked about the job I was going to do with the Bureau. There was lots of funny conversation about like, what are you going to do over there? Something related, because they knew it was terrorism, like insert whatever biker gangs. But I will never forget that my supervisor at the time, and if he's out there, Lex, I still remember this to this day, him sitting me down in his office and saying, you are now have the mission that when you go to the FBI, you have to remember your experience at DIA and how important it is for the FBI to share information with other agencies and why their information has value to the broader intelligence community. And that was something that really was a driving force behind a great deal of what I did when I came to the Bureau. I was lucky, landed with a great team. I had the opportunity to interact with other parts of the intelligence community, which led to me going over to the ODNI and mission management, where one of my tasks was to get the Bureau to write more. Thinking back to that conversation with Lex way back when in the Pentagon, I was like, I'm finally getting to do what I feel like is one of my missions to do. I'm from Massachusetts. I really wanted to get back to Massachusetts. My father passed away. The driver to get back was just really important to be with my family. And so when the opportunity came around to go to the Boston division, I was like, yes, I want to go back to Boston. And I went back to Boston as a supervisor for the analysts embedded in the criminal squads at a time where the integration of intelligence had really just got started. So a bit of definitely a challenge to take my experience in national security, apply that to the criminal programs. I was really lucky that a lot of the analysts were newly embedded and new to the Bureau. And then I had some other analysts who had been around for a while. And so I had an interesting balance of folks that were, 100%, we're going to do this thing. And others who maybe were a little bit more resistant, but eventually saw, I think, the value of it. I was one of the first SSIAs that the Bureau had. So that's a Senior Supervisory Intelligence Analyst. I built out the Northeast Regional Intelligence Group when they existed. And then when the Bureau changed direction, I was lucky enough to go to a resident agency, which is where I transitioned out. And it was a much better commute, a great team of agents. We did some really great work. And then at some point in that time, I felt like I could do more and I had more to give, but in an RA, you don't really have that opportunity. So I had to really think about, well, what do I do next? And that's really what led to me leaving the Bureau and moving into the private sector. Was I really felt like I was underutilized where I was, and there wasn't a lot of upward mobility in the Bureau for me at that time. And so let's see what's out there in the private sector and how can I take all these skills and apply them in a different way. And I was really fortunate to find a hiring manager. It took me about 2 years to find a hiring manager who was willing to take a chance on a FBI intelligence analyst. And that was at a pharmaceutical company in Cambridge, Mass, who was like, yep, you've got the skills we need and we want you to come build our intel program.
That's awesome. What an opportunity there. Something that I don't know that our listeners might not understand, even though the FBI is a law enforcement agency, it's also an intelligence agency. And it's kind of a struggle sometimes of the balance between law enforcement and intelligence. And there's not a lot of upward mobility for intelligence analysts in the field. So outside of headquarters, outside of DC, Nikki was an SSIA, Senior Supervisory Intelligence Analyst, and that's the highest you can go in the field. They have created some intelligence analyst in charge positions that are like a special agent in charge, but there are none in the Bureau right now. They're all SACs, no IACs. You had reached the top of what you could actually do in the field.
You reach a point in your career where you have a lot more to give. And even if you do go back to headquarters to take a more senior role, it may or may not be in intelligence. And I'm very passionate about intelligence as not just a role, but a process, the product, its ability to drive operations. Like those are things that are really passionate to me. And as much as I toyed with, well, I could go back to headquarters and what would that look like, but where would I end up? I was really challenged with whether or not I'd be able to leverage that passion I have for the subject matter at headquarters. It was a really hard choice, but I think timing is everything. And the timing of when I was thinking about that, there weren't opportunities at headquarters that made sense for me. And moving back to DC it's expensive to live in DC, and where I was living was much more reasonable. So
yeah, it plays into a lot of decisions there.
yeah.
So we just talked about like there were not really a lot of growth opportunities, but is there anything that would have changed your decision to stay?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's a laundry list of things I think that would have made a big difference. When I left, it was well after we all survived the pandemic and sort of the crazy schedules that we all kept during the pandemic. And I still had the passion for the work. And this was well after January 6th as well, so that I decided to leave. But there were also a lot of signposts for me that the Bureau was sort of stalled in the development of the intelligence program. And that contributed to my decision to leave as well. I had a pretty vocal voice in the Boston division. I had a lot of folks that I worked with across other field offices and headquarters where I could provide mentorship and support. But I also saw that there were parts of the organization that had kind of stalled in the way that it was implementing intelligence and leveraging intelligence analysts, and a little bit of a backslide. If there had been better forward momentum, better integration, like any federal organization, there are challenges around checklists of things that allow you to get to next levels. And there was a lot of that was happening. The processes weren't valuing experience and capability. They were valuing whether or not you could tick all the boxes in order to advance in your career, and a lot of this was a personal decision, right? I felt like, I don't know, I've been around too long to go back to the basics of the checkbox. Like my experience and my reputation to a certain extent speak for itself. And I wasn't really in the mindset that I was willing to go back to that, get in line and follow the checklist type of situation.
Right.
If those things had been different, I probably would have stayed. I maybe even would have, I don't know, my spouse might not have wanted to go to headquarters. I would have certainly applied for maybe more senior level jobs in the division. They were available. It just didn't seem like a good fit for where I was in my career.
Yeah. And they were constantly adding check boxes over the last 5 to 10 years that you had to go back to add to your list. And you're like, okay, great. So you left the Bureau and you went and built an intelligence program for a private company. What else have you been doing since then? Tell us more about that.
Sure. So that was an amazing experience. And that organization, after the pandemic ended, had some challenges that, required my role to be reduced. And I found myself out here looking again for a new role. And I was really fortunate to land a role with a security firm who wanted me to be part of their team, helping run their in-house intelligence team, helping them support their clients with an intelligence-driven operational approach. So I have a small team of analysts there. And I've also been doing a lot of work as Duck Cove consultants, where I'm helping a lot of former federal employees transition into the private sector, helping them navigate sort of where they found themselves, either after the fork in the road or DRP or whatever terminology we're using for it right now, or just deciding that government service isn't for them anymore and are looking to move into the private sector. I've been doing a lot of work with those folks, just helping them understand what it looks like on the outside and how to leverage their skills, and talk to hiring managers about what they did in government service and why they're valuable to organizations in the private sector.
And that's so helpful. Having somebody coach you, mentor you, and let you know that your work is valuable and how to translate that, because you have done that. Do you want to share more about your consulting and what your plans are with your company, but also building intelligence programs in the private sector?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it's like this crazy theme that has followed me in my career is that when I went into government service and intelligence, and I was just so taken with it, especially at DIA, where it's such an established program, I learned to be an intelligence analyst at DIA and got exposed to how the rest of the community does work. The Bureau at that time to me was a mystery because it wasn't fully integrated with the rest of the community. So it was always like, oh, I wonder how they do it. And so when I transitioned to the Bureau, I was like, well, this is interesting. They definitely don't do intelligence the same here. They definitely don't value intelligence professionals the same here. And there's a lot of room for growth. And so I found that I had the opportunity to help, at least in the unit that I was in, I could do a lot of work to bring intelligence analysts from across the Bureau together to focus on a specific threat actor. I could integrate us better with similar components at other agencies, and I hosted conferences while I was at headquarters. I did the same when I went to the field running the regional intelligence group. We hosted an interagency conference to talk about specific topics. So it's always been part of my career path to mentor and advance intelligence as a profession. And so when I ended up in the private sector, and I'm like, okay, I'm building an intelligence program. This is great, but where's the career progression for an intelligence analyst? Like both within this company, but then in other companies, why do we use the word intelligence to apply to everything when really intelligence has its own definition? It's a process. There's a product at the end of that. It has action-oriented assessments and recommendations, but that's not consistent in the private sector. So a lot of what I've been doing since I've been out here in the private sector is trying to talk a lot about what it means to be an intelligence analyst, what it means to write an intelligence product, why that skill set is important, and why having career progression and a career pathway and some level of understanding of what the difference is between someone who just gathers information and someone who writes intelligence, why that's important. A lot of what I've done through my consulting work is advocate for intelligence professionals and the process of doing intelligence analysis, whether I'm talking on a podcast about AI-enabled tools or if I'm talking about career progression or career transition. It's always with a thought in mind that this conversation can help advance intelligence in the private sector and help create pathways for those professionals who are doing what I consider like the real intelligence work and writing intelligence products. So that's just a theme. I feel like I do that with students. I mentor a lot of students. In my courses, I've co-wrote an intelligence for professionals course at Nichols College that still exists today. And I continue to do work in support of that. That's the same with the work that I do at Sentinel, helping the team write intelligence products that will drive outcomes for the clients, whether that's through embedding analysts at client locations or acting as the intel team for clients so that they get the intelligence products that they need. It is funny to me just how organically that all happened in terms of taking something that I was always very passionate about and being able to grow that through consultancy to be able to support not just the work that I'm doing and the people who I work with are doing, but now for all of the folks who are leaving federal government who do that work, who are professionals in that work, and hopefully helping create a pathway for them so that it is less of an uphill battle. Because I know when I was in the Bureau, intelligence of the Bureau sometimes felt like an uphill battle. So if I can help reduce the steepness of that hill for folks that come out here in the private sector to do similar work, I'm happy to do it.
I love that. As intelligence professionals, Philip and I have had a lot of talks while looking at jobs and interviewing for jobs. There seems to be a disconnect somewhere of what intelligence work actually is. And as you say, it is a process. It is actually a discipline within itself. Philip, do you want to jump in there? Because you had a lot to say about that at one point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like everything that you're saying has been very reflective of the conversations Jill and I have had. I actually wanted to rewind a little bit. As you were talking, I thought it was really interesting. When you came to the FBI, you thought it was a mystery because they weren't integrating with the community, but you felt a need to share information with the community. And like you sort of took that upon yourself to try and correct that. That is very admirable. Like, you mentioned coming in around the time of 9/11 because of the impact it had on you. And those were both goals that were set for the Bureau and the IC out of the 9/11 report. And it sounds like maybe we didn't learn some of those lessons as good as we should have. Yeah, I think some of that does translate to the private sector, like you were saying, where there aren't common sort of understandings and definitions and things. And I've run into that a lot. I've interviewed at a lot of different companies, and it's sort of a mystery every time, going from just understanding what they're looking for in the job description to then getting into the interview and like getting the surprise questions of, oh, well, that's not what I thought this was going to be at all. but there are good companies out there. There are a few that I think are doing a better job than others. And there's also a lot of consulting work available until they figure it out. So I've appreciated everything you've been saying.
Thank you. And it is a challenge, even when I'm working with clients to help them with career transition, just helping to navigate the job descriptions and the use of the term intelligence, or what other job titles include the need to be an intelligence analyst. I know when I went through that, there weren't other people like me out there who I could reach out to, which is one of the reasons when I found the FBI Association of Intelligence Analysts, I was like, I have there's a community, like people I can ask questions of. I had gone through my transition before I realized that they existed. So I try to do a lot with them as well. I'm on the board and I try to support others and that mission as well, because I think it's so important on the transition side of things, finding community and leveraging it. In private sector terms, it's networking, right? It's not something that naturally we do as intelligence professionals because we're often hiding.
Yeah, we're the people, we're the introverts that are sitting in the corner, taking everything and looking at it and analyzing and watching everything.
Yeah, and being exceptionally cautious because you don't know on the outside of government walls what organizations are trustworthy or what contacts are trustworthy. And so knowing that you have a network of trustworthy contacts because you have a similar origin story can be hugely empowering and helpful. Just all of that navigation is hard, and frankly, being on the outside, like watching what's happening now with the Bureau, is so gut-wrenching to not be there to support others who are still in those roles and having to navigate, the challenges, and just gut-wrenching to talk to people who have taken the fork in the road or are on admin leave and helping, just being a good sounding board for them as they just need someone to talk to, someone who is in that trusted circle who they can share those frustrations with, just so that they don't feel so all alone. And I think that's another critical part, like just what you guys are doing in your podcast and what others like you are doing, whether it's like Fed Up or the former Fed and all these other entities who are out there, being there for federal workers who are really challenged right now. And I don't know that that is really discussed enough or acknowledged enough. I've been through government shutdowns and things like that. And I know that most people don't understand how that really impacts the employee, but this is even more than that. And I think the real impact on real people and real families is important.
Yeah, I remember several years ago when the first big government shutdown happened, and we actually did miss, I forget how many paychecks we missed. They ended up paying them back in arrears, but, we're living off of savings for weeks, maybe a month or more.
It was 6 weeks because we shut down right before Christmas. They did not fund the government until the end of January.
Yeah, but at the time, it was like, this is just the most threatening thing I've ever seen for federal workers. And it's undermining the value of the career stability that's the major draw beyond, the moral and ethical things that draw people to federal service. And so to have gone from that to where we are now is just, it's been a roller coaster.
Mind-blowing. Yeah, it's absolutely mind-blowing. And not for nothing, but certain parts of the government, they shut down. Those people don't actually go to work. We went to work every day. And I think that it's undervalued just how important the folks who do what we do and others from other agencies who are focused in different directions, what they do. I think it's undervalued as how important that is to national security, to domestic security. That's just important for people to remember.
Yeah, 100%. I will add that even for the people who didn't have to come to work during that time, it's not like they could just rush out and get another job to pay the bills. They were stuck at home not getting paid, which is, I don't know which is worse actually, having something to keep your mind busy all day or having to sit there and think about it all day.
And I would say for the vast majority of us, our value of the mission and why the mission was important didn't matter if they were paying us or not. The mission still has to happen. We are there to protect the United States, U.S. citizens. whether they're home or away, that's what we do. And it doesn't matter if you're paying me to do it or not. Like I would still do it today. Like I still, if I see something that is worthwhile to pass forward to federal law enforcement, I do it because to me, that mission is important.
Yeah, and I think what you're getting at there has been something that has been pushing me to, it's been pushing me to the private sector is, I feel like there's a lot more that the private sector can be doing now in the absence of what the government was doing to accomplish the mission. And I think there's actually a lot of potential there and some good things can come of this.
Yeah, 100%. One of the things that I think hasn't really seen its full potential is the way that government and private sector can work together. There's a lot of just the intellectual property that exists in the private sector and how important that is to US economic security. Why don't we talk about that more? Because that is half the reason why you have nation state actors targeting private corporations. They're trying to get economic advantage. And this is very important to our stability as a nation. So there's so much more work that can be done there, more synergy, more cooperation, more information sharing that I think those of us who are now entering into the private sector can really help foster and strengthen those relationships because we all understand how government operates and what's valuable to them. And we know what government has that is valuable to the private sector. So in those roles, we can really help improve that relationship. I also think that what we're seeing right now happen with the intelligence community is almost a deprecation of what is going to be available to the private sector. And I know I have lots of private sector colleagues who rely heavily on, the annual threat assessments that come out. And if they start to question whether or not those documents are valid or if those are going to be done at all, which is a huge question mark, what are they going to do? How are they going to fill that void? And a lot of it is going to sit with all the federal employees who are coming out into the private sector and just how valuable their body of knowledge is to those private sector companies. I think is another thing that the private sector has undervalued, just how important this new surge of brain power is going to be to their intelligence programs and their risk assessments and their understanding of the threat surface. I think that's something that private sector companies, I don't think fully appreciate just how valuable all of these new former federal employees are going to be to their organizations.
Yeah, early on, I remember CISA had decided to move away from the way that they had been sharing information with the private sector to posting on Twitter instead. And it took everybody by shock. And there were a lot of nonprofit type efforts starting up around, well, okay, I guess the government's not going to host these major information sharing efforts that our nation's critical infrastructure relies on. So we're going to have to do it ourselves. I think a lot of that could be a good thing. I don't think that the burden should fall on any one individual or any one organization for that. I think everybody should contribute and come together. But when we move some of that out of the government, we also take away some of the sort of the shadowy, darkness of it that people are like, oh, I don't want to work with them because I don't know what they do inside. And we bring that out into the light. And I think that's all great. I think that's a positive way forward.
And it encourages collaboration. Where if you're just relying on one agency just to provide data, where's the collaboration in that? Fostering collaboration, I think, makes us all successful. I saw that in government. I think one of the superpowers I had was knowing who to call in the government to find the answers that we needed, depending on what case we were working on or what question mark we had. I think that's the same in the private sector. That level of collaboration, everyone brings different skill sets, different information, different access to information, different viewpoints. I think that's all very valuable.
I appreciate that you're mentioning the different viewpoints and having so many different skill sets brought together. That's something that as an intelligence analyst and having just the title of intelligence analyst for almost a decade, applying with certain jobs, they're like, oh, but you have to have this experience just in this field. And it's like, no, you don't understand. I'm trained to learn more about your program and give you that outside perspective as well to question, well, what does that mean? What is that? And I think that's something that gets missed on the private sector side. There are people trained to look from the outside in. You may not have the expertise in science or in certain business financial sectors, but being able to come in and take what they have and start seeing the gaps that they're missing is a huge missed opportunity in the private sector. Sorry, that's my soapbox. I'm going to jump back off of it.
No, but you make such an important point. I spoke at a conference last year, and then I had said that intelligence analysts are today's unicorn. And I mean that. Intelligence analysts, like, if you focus on the fact that they're trained in a process and that the outcome of that process is something actionable, the rest of it is just kind of the dirty details. You could take that person trained in that process, because everyone who ever worked in the government has had to pivot at some point to learn something they know nothing about and be a subject matter expert in it in a very short period of time. You take that kind of person and you can stick them into nearly any organization, any part of an organization. They foundationally have every skill that they need to do the work. They just have to learn the details of that job and that function. That's what makes intelligence analysts unicorns, because we've done that our entire career. We've pivoted, we've learned new things, we've applied new skills, we've learned new technology, figured out how to apply that. But that intelligence process that we brought with us has always been there. When I look back at my career, because I have a bachelor's in biology, for me, it's like, hypothesis testing? Yeah, I know all about that. I can apply that in an intelligence format. Organizing data and making sense out of that data. Yep, I could do that as an intelligence analyst. Like, the one-to-one comparison for a lot of people, and until I break it down into those parts, it's like, oh yeah, I guess there are some parallels there. It's like, yes, when you take that person who's been trained in all of that and say, okay, you're going to do something in the finance sector, they can learn the finance part. In the pharmaceutical sector, yep, they can learn what it means to work in the pharmaceutical sector. Pick your place. They can learn that because they foundationally have all the other tools that they need.
I think that sums it up perfectly. That's it.
That does sum it up quite well. So what's next for you? Where are you going now in the future?
I don't know. I think one of the things that has been, well, at least in the last, I don't know, since November, whatever, how many months that's been, I never had to worry about being laid off when I was in government. And then when I got laid off from my first private sector job, I'm like, oh, this is interesting. How do we navigate this? I think what I've learned is to just be open-minded to whatever comes next. So I'm enjoying the consulting work. I'm enjoying having the opportunity to talk to people like you. I'm enjoying the opportunity to help other people transition. And whatever happens next for me will be organic. I won't lie. Someday I would love to be like the first chief intelligence officer in some private sector company, helping create synergy between chief security officers and chief information security officers, and helping CEOs or boards navigate the next big risk. I would love to do that. But that role doesn't exist yet, but maybe in the work that I'm doing someday it will. And if I'm still bopping around and working, and I haven't yet retired, because God only knows how long that will take to get that role created somewhere, maybe that will be where I end up. We'll see. Right now, I'm just happy doing what I'm doing.
I love that. Before I ask our last question, Nikki, is there anything else that you'd like to add or share with our listeners?
I don't know. I just want to give everyone who is in this weird gray transition area a giant virtual hug. Know that you're not alone. Know that there's others out here who've successfully transitioned. Leverage those people, leverage those relationships. You will find something and you will be successful. And that makes me emotional.
I know, I see that. And it's very touching to have people say it's going to be okay and you have support out there. Thank you, Nikki. Thank you so much for that support and for being there. It's nice to know you're not alone. Final question. Would you ever go back to federal service?
So, funny story. In November, I applied for a job with the ODNI. It was in emerging technologies. I went through the interview process, and that was right before everything went downhill in the sense that basically all hiring stopped and was frozen. Once those organizations waited to figure out how things would change with a new administration, and I think that job went away. I don't think it exists anymore. I think it was part of the NIC, National Intelligence Council. So yeah, I would certainly go back to government. I loved it. I love the mission. I love being able to know that I'm supporting the United States and protecting what we all hold dear. So it's never out of the cards, although I think from where I live now, it would be hard to leave this beautiful setting up here in the middle of nature to go back to DC, but I never say never.
I love that. Nikki, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your story. It's so good to hear from other people who have been successful leaving government service and sharing that. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it.
And thank you for forking off with us.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Forking Off. To our listeners still in government, remember, your integrity is worth more than your TSP. Leaving doesn't mean giving up on public service. It just means finding new ways to serve.
Until next time,
Keep your ethics,
keep your dignity.
and we'll keep telling these stories.
If you're a former Fed with a story to tell, or you're wrestling with your own ethical crossroads, reach out to us at info@forkingoff.com.
Today's episode was created, produced, and edited by Jill and Philip Fields. Special thanks to our guest, Nikki Rutman. You can find more information about this episode at forkingoff.com. Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, Mastodon, LinkedIn, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Join us Monday, January 5th.
As we talk with former federal prosecutor Mike Romano.
When I saw the pardons come down, I had a pretty sinking feeling immediately that I had to leave, that there wasn't a place for me to stay in the Justice Department. And that feels awful to say because I loved my job. I loved doing it. I had envisioned that maybe I would do it for my whole career. Maybe I would retire in federal service. For the 2 months or so between inauguration and when I found a new job, I thought I was going to get fired like every day. I just assumed that the axe would fall at some point and had that stress and that pit in my stomach all the time. It was miserable. I think, even worse is pardoning people who committed violent crimes. We knew that the pardons were just based on lies about our work and how people were treated. Right? The executive order came out and said that this was somehow a grave national injustice and that the pardons would begin a process of reconciliation. And when we think about reconciliation, we don't think about sweeping a problem under a rug and ignoring it. It's not usually what that means.